Welcome back to Navigating Possibility. Today's episode is a quiet one, not because it's small, but because it's heavy and because it deserves to be handled gently. I want to talk about what happens when something bad happens to a patient, or in the case of an obstetrician like me, to the patient's baby. And it really stays with us, not just clinically, not just intellectually, but emotionally. If you've ever driven home in tears after a shift or sat in your car sobbing before you could see straight to drive home, if you've ever replayed a case while brushing your teeth or lying awake at night, if you've ever found yourself thinking, I should be over this by now. What's going on? What's wrong with me? I want you to know you're not broken and you're not alone. If you've practiced long enough, if you've done enough deliveries or surgeries, you'll have bad outcomes. It's unfortunately part of the gig. It's unavoidable, no matter how perfect of a doctor you are. This is the hidden emotional labor of being a physician, especially for those of us who care deeply about the humans that we're taking care of. So there's an idea, there's a term in medicine that's often used to describe this experience, and it's called the second victim. And honestly, I've always had mixed feelings about that term. On one hand, it acknowledges that clinicians are affected by adverse outcomes, which is important. But on the other hand, the word victim implies that someone did something wrong. And most of the time, that's just not what happened. Patients are often the victims of bad luck, of biology, of timing, of disease processes that don't care how smart, careful, or well intentioned their physicians are. And calling physicians dealing with a bad outcome victims just doesn't quite fit. We get to go home at the end of the day. We're physically okay. We get to hug our kids and our partners and crawl into our own beds. And yet, we all carry questions. What if I'd made a different call? What if I'd pushed harder for something that I thought needed to be done? What if I'd noticed that little sign sooner? And here's the uncomfortable truth, and we don't talk about this enough. If we didn't ask ourselves those questions, we wouldn't be very good doctors. Medicine trains us to question ourselves. It's built on reflection and critique. From the very beginning of training, we're taught to evaluate outcomes and look for ways to improve them. Things like morbidity and mortality conferences, chart reviews, root cause analyses, peer feedback. All of it is designed to ask, could this have somehow gone differently? What could we have done to get a better outcome? This process is quite frankly essential to medicine. It ultimately makes us better clinicians. It improves systems. We all have done the CME on, medical error prevention, and we know about the Swiss cheese theory. This sort of stuff finds the holes in the Swiss cheese and fixes them. It helps future patients. But here's what gets missed in that process. The process can be emotionally devastating when the outcome involves real loss, especially when you know you did the best you could with the information you had at the time, especially when the outcome was unavoidable, especially when you already feel the weight of responsibility so deeply. We're trained to be objective, but we're not robots. We're humans with human brains, and sometimes the line between healthy reflection and self-punishment gets really blurry. Empathy in medicine is like a double-edged sword. You can't be good at this job without empathy. Full stop. Empathy is what allows us to connect, listen, advocate, and notice subtle changes that matter. But empathy also means that suffering doesn't just pass through us without touching us. We're taught very early to compartmentalize. And most of us do this exceptionally well, sometimes a little too well. We have to be able to compartmentalize, otherwise, we couldn't function. We'd be curled up in the fetal position in the supply closet on day one. But our ability to compartmentalize isn't infinite. Everyone has a limit. And occasionally, a case breaks through the walls that we've built. Maybe it reminds you of someone you love. Maybe it happens at the end of a long stretch of call when you're exhausted and your reserves are gone. Maybe it makes you doubt yourself, makes you question whether you did the right thing. Maybe it's just one of those outcomes that feels profoundly unfair. I don't know how many times I have said to colleagues, why do bad things always happen to the nicest patients? Things just sometimes don't feel fair. And when that happens, our usual coping strategies stop working. You're still showing up, you're still doing your job, but something feels heavier than usual. In a lot of hospitals, when something happens, when a bad outcome happens, the leadership will schedule debriefs. And I think debriefing matters more than we realize. When debriefs happen, they can be really powerful because in real time, emergencies move fast. There's no space to process, only to act. If we break down in tears, we're not being clinically effective anymore. Debriefing after an emergency or a bad outcome gives us a chance to slow the story down, understand the decisions that were made by ourselves and by others, hear what others were seeing and thinking, name fears that we didn't voice in the moment. And often what people really need to hear is simple. You did the best you could in an impossible situation. The patient was lucky to have you. Personally, I think we reserve debriefs for outcomes that are bad enough, but many situations that don't end catastrophically still leave emotional residue. What if we normalize debriefing as support, not just as a response to tragedy? What if we allowed ourselves to say, that was really hard, even when the patient survived and all was well? I think we're also, in the past few years in medicine, dealing with a lot of collective trauma and the aftermath of sustained stress after 2020 and the years that followed. Medicine's been operating under extraordinary strain for years. We've basically been running on fumes, operating on vapor. Many clinicians have witnessed sustained levels of suffering, death, and moral distress, often without adequate support. And here's something that concerns me deeply. Trauma doesn't always hit during the crisis. Most often, it shows up later. When survival mode ends, when there's finally space to take a breath, and your nervous system realizes it's safe enough to feel things, that's when anxiety spikes, depression creeps in, and that's when people start questioning whether they can keep doing this. It doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've been strong for a very long time, and you've reached the end of your capacity. So what can we do without pretending there's a quick fix? Because there's not. We're humans taking care of humans. Bad things are going to continue to happen to people, and we're going to continue to witness them. I wish there was some checklist that would make all this easier, but I can't offer you that because it doesn't exist. But here's what I think matters. We look out for each other. We check in, really check in with each other. We notice when somebody seems quieter, more withdrawn, more irritable, more exhausted than usual. We also have to normalize getting help in all the ways: medication, therapy, coaching. All of these have value. We normalize talking about bad outcomes and how they affect us because they affect all of us. So we need to make it a normal thing to talk about that. We don't have to discuss the specifics of the situation and violate HIPAA, which is what everyone's worried about, to discuss how the situation made us feel. We need to normalize the grief that comes with caring deeply. After all, our humanity is what makes us good doctors. And we remind each other that feeling like you failed doesn't necessarily mean you did. That's our conditioning talking. That's our perfectionism. Sometimes bad outcomes mean we did the best we could in an impossible situation. And we have to give ourselves grace in those situations and space to move forward. So, if this episode resonated with you, I want you to hear this clearly. There's nothing wrong with you. Caring deeply is not a liability. Being affected doesn't mean you're not resilient. Questioning yourself doesn't mean you're incompetent. It means you're human. And it means you're exactly the kind of physician your patients need. So, before you move on with your day, I want to leave you with a gentle, reflective question. There's no need to answer it perfectly. Just notice what comes up for you when you hear it. Maybe write in a journal about it, because believe it or not, that really helps. You can see your thoughts on paper and analyze them. They're not just swirling in the ether in your brain. So here's the question. Is there a patient, case, or outcome that you've been carrying quietly? And what would it feel like to offer yourself the same compassion you would give a colleague in that situation? What would you say to a friend who found themselves in the same situation? And how is that different from what you're saying to yourself? Thanks for being here. And I want you to engage with the possibility that navigating bad outcomes sometimes means giving yourself the grace to say you did the best you could in an imperfect situation. You are an imperfect human doing your best, and you're enough. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time on Navigating Possibility.